Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The Smith estate buzzed with its usual air of importance. White pillars framed the mansion's front, and luxury cars came and went like clockwork. Amidst this grandeur, Happiness arrived quietly at the back gate, clutching her small, faded bag. She wore plain clothes and shoes that had known too many miles. Her eyes, though calm, carried something else, something weary yet resilient. Victoria Smith, standing on the upstairs balcony with her morning tea, spotted her immediately. "That must be the new maid from the agency," she muttered, squinting. "Looks too soft for hard work." Downstairs, the head maid directed Happiness with little interest, handing her a uniform and a room key. "We don't tolerate mistakes here," she said flatly. "You keep to your quarters when you're not working. No chatting, no snooping." Inside the mansion, Joshua Smith, Victoria's son and heir to the Smith conglomerate, barely noticed her arrival. His mind was buried in financial reports and shareholder meetings. But Victoria noticed everything. Over dinner that night, she mentioned the new girl casually. "You should really consider trimming down the staff, Joshua," she said, cutting into her roast. "There's a new girl, fragile-looking, from some rural area. I don't trust her type around our things." Joshua gave a disinterested shrug. "If she does her job, I don't care where she's from," he replied. But Victoria's eyes lingered too long on her son, lips curled slightly in disdain. "That's the problem. You never care until something is stolen or broken." In the servants' quarters, Happiness unpacked silently, her fingers brushing over a worn photograph she kept hidden at the bottom of her bag. She exhaled deeply. This job wasn't just survival, it was a beginning. A place to start over, even if she didn't yet know from what she was starting over. It was a late Thursday morning when Joshua passed through the hallway toward his study, distracted by a call from the board. The house was quiet, only the soft sound of humming floated from the corridor near the kitchen. Without thinking, he followed the tune, a simple melody that struck a chord somewhere deep inside him. Rounding the corner, he paused. There she was, Happiness, reaching up to clean the glass of a chandelier with a steady hand. Her humming stopped abruptly when she noticed him. "Sorry, sir," she said, stepping aside quickly, her eyes lowered. Joshua blinked, startled not just by her voice, but by the gentle curve of her smile. It wasn't just familiar, it was unsettlingly warm in a way he hadn't seen in years. "Carry on," he muttered, almost awkwardly, then turned to leave, but not without glancing back once more. That smile. Later that evening, while reviewing contracts in his study, Joshua found himself distracted. He stared at the document before him, but the inked words blurred into one another. He rubbed his temples, trying to focus, but the girl's face kept drifting into view, calm, reserved, quietly beautiful in a way that pulled at a memory he couldn't fully grab. He sat back in his leather chair, exhaling deeply. "Why do you feel so familiar?" he whispered aloud, not expecting an answer. Downstairs, Happiness worked quietly, cleaning the antique frames in the hallway. As she passed the dining room mirror, she paused and stared at her reflection, then forced a weak smile. "Don't look too long," she murmured to herself. "They'll think you're dreaming." What neither of them knew was that this passing smile, these lingering stares, were not coincidences. They were fragments from a bond long severed by time, and now, unknowingly, threading their way back. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where silence ruled the house. Happiness moved gracefully through the hallways, dusting furniture with practiced ease. Her uniform sat neatly against her body, but this time, as she bent to arrange the flower vase near the main staircase, a delicate glint of silver slipped from beneath her collar. The necklace, thin, old, with a small crescent moon charm, rested briefly against her chest. Joshua, walking past with his phone in hand, froze mid-step. His eyes locked on the charm, and time seemed to halt. They didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. When she stood upright and tucked it quickly back under the fabric, Joshua's heart pounded in his chest. No, it can't be. The necklace looked identical. No, it was identical to the one he'd given Joy, his childhood best friend, before she supposedly died. But that was decades ago, and that necklace was buried with her. That evening, he couldn't stop pacing in his room. The same necklace. He knew it by the dent on the side of the charm, a dent he'd accidentally made with a stone when they were playing near the river. "How the hell did she get it?" he whispered. That night over dinner, Joshua barely touched his food. His mother noticed. "You look ill," Victoria remarked coolly. "Too much thinking, I assume." He only glanced at her, then looked away. He needed to know more, about the girl, about her past, about why she wore a necklace that was supposed to be 6 feet underground. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the maid's quarters, Happiness unhooked the chain and stared at it like she had for years. "Why do I feel like this means something more than I remember?" she whispered to herself. There were gaps in her childhood, memories she couldn't recall, places she wasn't sure she'd really been. All she knew was that her mother said the necklace was her only real inheritance. But tonight, for the first time, even she began to question why. Joshua waited until the house settled into its usual evening stillness, before slipping into the locked room that once belonged to his late grandfather, now converted into a private archive. He reached up into a high cabinet and pulled down a dusty, black notebook bound in leather. The corners were worn, the pages yellowing with time. He sat at the desk and opened it with care. Inside were drawings, dried petals, even childlike scrawls signed with a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Joy. His hand trembled as he flipped to a particular page, one that haunted him since he was 12. A crude sketch of a necklace, that same crescent moon pendant. He traced the outline with his finger. "I buried this with you," he murmured. "Why is it here, again?" The confusion now gave way to suspicion and something deeper, a fear he didn't want to name. He shut the book slowly, staring blankly at the wall. Everything about Happiness, her face, her mannerisms, even the stillness in her gaze, was beginning to feel too close. Was this a coincidence, or a cruel trick of fate? Or worse, was someone trying to manipulate him? Victoria had always hated sentimentality. And Harold. He was the kind of man who could erase a village if it protected the family name. Joshua leaned back in his chair and whispered, "Did I lose her, or did someone take her?" The memory of Joy's funeral resurfaced, except he never actually saw her body. Just a closed coffin. Just a town full of whispers and hurried goodbyes. He clenched his jaw. "I need answers," he muttered, "and I need them now." Meanwhile, Happiness sat by the open window in the servant quarters, eyes on the stars. Something about the night's air pulled at her. A name surfaced in her mind, but just out of reach. She hugged the necklace tightly to her chest. There was something missing inside her, a piece she'd learned to live without, but now it was beginning to ache again. Victoria stood by the grand staircase that morning with her arms crossed, watching Happiness walk past with a tray of folded linens. Her gaze was sharp, narrowed. "Agnes," she called, summoning the older maid who had been by her side for over a decade. "How long has that new girl been here?" Agnes wiped her hands on her apron and replied, "Just a few weeks, ma'am." Quiet type, keeps to herself. Victoria's fingers tapped against the banister. "I want her gone. Quiet doesn't mean innocent. She doesn't belong in this house." Agnes hesitated. "Should I say she was caught with something?" Victoria smiled coldly. "Do what needs to be done. Joshua doesn't need another distraction." Her voice dropped. "Especially not from the kind of girl that always comes with a sob story." She turned and walked off, her heels clicking like punctuation marks in the silence that followed. Meanwhile, Joshua was in his office, staring at the contract from a luxury resort chain that needed his signature. But his mind was elsewhere. The necklace, the girl, the unanswered questions. A knock at the door pulled him out of his daze. Agnes stepped in, pretending discomfort. "Sir, I'm sorry to say, but we've had a little incident." One of the kitchen staff reported that Happiness may have taken a ring from the guest suite. Joshua looked up sharply. "What kind of ring?" Agnes fumbled. "Just a gold band. It was on the vanity, and now it's missing. We thought it best to tell you first." Joshua frowned. "And you're sure it wasn't misplaced?" Agnes pressed. "It's not the first complaint. She's been wandering around unsupervised lately." For a moment, he stared at her, then nodded slowly. "Fine, prepare her file." But even as the words left his mouth, something inside him flinched like a warning bell, soft but steady. The idea of firing her suddenly felt wrong. Too final. Too premature. Joshua sat behind his desk later that evening, the letter of dismissal open in front of him, unsigned. His pen hovered just above the paper, frozen. The office was silent, lit only by a single lamp that cast long shadows across the floor. He read the words over again. Termination due to breach of conduct. They felt manufactured, thin, unfounded. He hated assumptions, but what if this was truly her doing? Still, the image of her face, of the necklace, of the uncertainty in her eyes, kept pulling at him. His hand dropped to the desk. "No," he whispered under his breath. "Not until I speak to her myself." Just then, a soft knock echoed through the room. "Come in," he said, straightening. The door opened, and there she stood, Happiness, her eyes lowered respectfully, her hands clasped in front of her. "You asked for me, sir," she said quietly. Joshua stood but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked around the desk and stood a few feet from her. "Where were you this afternoon at 3 p.m.?" he asked. She blinked. "In the laundry room, sir. I was ironing the guest bedding." "You can ask Martha." He nodded slowly, pacing again. Then his eyes fell, almost by instinct, to the edge of her blouse, where the faint glint of silver peeked again. "Can you do something for me?" he asked. "Can you take off that necklace?" Her hand immediately covered it protectively. "Why, sir?" she asked, confused. Joshua's voice was soft but stern. "I've seen it before, a long time ago. Just let me look at it." Reluctantly, she removed it and placed it in his palm. His breath caught. It wasn't similar, it was the one. The dent, the engraving on the back, J&J Forever Summer. His fingers trembled slightly. He looked up at her. "Where did you get this?" he asked, but his voice sounded almost distant to his own ears. Happiness stared at him, confused and a little frightened. "My mother gave it to me. Said it belonged to someone I loved before I was old enough to remember." That was the moment everything in Joshua's world tilted. Joshua's chest felt tight as he stared down at the necklace resting in his palm. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Every inch of it, from the dented charm to the fraying chain, was identical to the one he had buried with joy. His voice, unsteady and too low, asked again, "Happiness, are you sure your mother gave this to you?" She nodded, her brow creased with concern. "Yes, sir. She told me she found it after we moved from our old town. She kept it hidden until I was about 15. His grip on the necklace tightened. "What town?" She hesitated. "I think it was called Ukaje. I was too young. We left in a hurry. I don't remember much." Joshua stepped back, eyes wide. That was the name of his childhood village. His voice dropped into a whisper, as if afraid the truth might answer back. "You lived in Ukaje?" "Yes, sir," she said cautiously. "My mother told me we had to leave quickly because something happened, but she never said what." Her eyes searched his face now, unsure whether she was in trouble or being pulled into something far bigger than her job. Joshua's heart pounded against his ribs. His hands trembled as he handed the necklace back. "You can go," he said abruptly. I need time." Happiness curtsied slightly, confused and shaken. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she stopped and said, "Sir, I've never stolen anything. I don't know who's been saying those things, but I just want to work, that's all." Her voice was soft, honest. Then she left the room, leaving Joshua in silence, staring at the empty doorway as if it held the past he thought was long dead. The girl he buried may never have been buried at all. Sleep eluded Joshua that night. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, the necklace once again in his hand. Though he had returned it to her earlier, something inside him couldn't rest, so he had quietly asked one of the staff to retrieve it. Now it lay there, a relic from a life that no longer made sense. His mind was a minefield of memories, some sharp, others faint and blurred. He remembered laughter near riverbanks, barefoot races through mango orchards, and the warm hand of a girl who always called him Joshy when no one was around. That girl, Joy, had been his closest friend until the day she was gone. Fever, they said, buried quickly. But there was never a goodbye, no final sight. Just a closed coffin and a sea of silence. Now the girl who worked in his house wore her necklace and carried her smile. Joshua's thoughts drifted into restless dreams. In the haze of sleep, he stood beneath a wide mango tree, barefoot again, a slingshot tucked into his waistband. Joy laughed nearby, her dress dusty, her knees scraped from climbing. "You said you'd never forget me," she giggled, tossing a pebble his way. "Even if I disappear." He reached out to her in the dream, but her face began to blur. "Don't go," he murmured, but she only smiled and whispered, "Remember me." He jerked awake, drenched in sweat. The morning sun was just rising, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor. He sat up slowly, gripping the necklace like a lifeline. "If you're her," he whispered, "why don't you remember me?" Downstairs, Happiness was already folding linen in the laundry room, her face pale from another sleepless night. She had dreamt of laughter too, of mangoes and water and a voice calling her joy. She didn't know why the dream had left her in tears. Joshua arrived late to breakfast, still visibly shaken. His father, Harold Smith, was already seated at the long table, reading the financial section of the newspaper. "You're slipping," Harold said without looking up. "Third time this week you're late." Joshua didn't answer at first. He poured himself some black coffee and sat. "Dad," he finally said, his voice lower than usual. "Do you remember the girl from Ukeji? The one who passed away when I was little?" Harold lowered his paper slightly, his jaw tightening. "What about her?" Joshua hesitated. "Did you ever see her after the burial?" Harold folded the paper slowly and placed it on the table. "Why are you dredging up ghosts?" he asked calmly, but there was tension under the surface. "Because something doesn't make sense," Joshua said, leaning in. "I think someone lied to me." Harold looked at his son for a long moment, then leaned back. "Listen to me carefully, Joshua. You have a company to run, an image to protect, and a future that shouldn't be tied to fairy tales. That girl, whatever her name was, is gone. Leave it that way." Joshua's fists clenched beneath the table. "So you don't deny something's off?" Harold's voice turned cold. "The past is dead. That's not a puzzle to solve. It's a door you keep closed. Understand?" He stood and left without waiting for a response. Victoria appeared seconds later, setting down her teacup with a soft clink. "You've always been too sentimental," she said, not unkindly. "It's not a trait we can afford in this family." Joshua sat there long after they'd gone, his appetite forgotten. That conversation didn't kill his suspicion. It confirmed it. If the past was buried, someone had buried it with intention. And maybe it was time to dig it up. The decision came to Joshua in the quiet of his car. He dismissed his driver and took the wheel himself. The road to Ukeji was long and winding and unfamiliar now. Modern structures had replaced the mud houses, but the red soil and tall palms remained untouched. When he arrived, he parked beside a faded primary school building and walked slowly through the village's heart. Old women stared at him with curiosity, some with recognition. "You're Chief Smith's boy, aren't you?" one asked. He nodded. "I used to play here. I'm looking for memories." The woman smiled faintly. "You mean Joy?" Joshua's breath caught. "Yes," he said. "Do you know what happened to her?" The woman hesitated. "All we were told was that she got sick. But no one saw her body. Her parents left before dawn the next day, vanished." He made his way to the small graveyard behind the church, where children once played hide and seek. He searched the crooked headstones until he found it. A small stone marker, half sunk in the earth. Joy Akechi, 1996-2003. He crouched beside it, brushing away the overgrown weeds. But something about it was wrong. The earth felt undisturbed, the grave too shallow. He stood slowly, unease tightening in his chest. Behind him, an old caretaker approached. "Many of the children buried back, then didn't really stay," the man muttered. "Sometimes families moved them." Joshua turned. "Do you remember this one?" The man glanced at the name, then at Joshua. "Her parents were paid to leave. That's all I know." Joshua's heart pounded as he returned to the car. The grave was empty. The girl wasn't dead. And that meant the woman working in his house wasn't a stranger. She was a stolen memory, still alive. Agnes had always believed herself to be second only to Victoria in the house hierarchy. The moment Happiness arrived, something shifted, and it irritated her. The new maid didn't gossip, didn't rush to please anyone, and somehow still carried herself with quiet confidence. That unsettled Agnes, and now she had Victoria's ear more than ever. "She's hiding something, madam," Agnes said one afternoon while pouring tea for Victoria. "You should have seen the way she clutched that necklace the other day. like it was gold. Victoria looked up from her embroidery. You've mentioned her quite a lot lately, Agnes. What exactly are you trying to say? Agnes leaned in, lowering her voice. I wouldn't be surprised if she was brought here on purpose. She's always looking around like she knows this place better than she should. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Start watching her more closely, and keep your findings between us. Later that week, Agnes whispered to the kitchen staff that Happiness had been caught standing too close to Joshua's study. She said she was dusting, but that's not even her assigned floor, she told Martha. The rumor spread like wildfire. By the time evening fell, whispers trailed Happiness wherever she walked. She's probably trying to get close to the boss, one staffer muttered. They always pretend to be quiet. Then boom, they're pregnant, and in the guest room. Happiness heard fragments of these conversations in the hallway. At first, she ignored them. But when the cook abruptly stopped handing her trays or the gardener began avoiding her gaze, her heart sank. That night, alone in her room, she stared at the ceiling in the dark. What am I doing here? She whispered. What am I even trying to find? But the answer wasn't clear. All she knew was that something was wrong, not just around her, but within her. The sun was high the next day when Happiness was assigned to clean Joshua's private library, a room few maids entered and fewer were allowed to linger in. She moved quietly between the shelves, dusting books and wiping down the desk. As she reached for a stack of old ledgers, one slid off the pile and landed with a soft thud. Bending to retrieve it, her hand brushed against something tucked beneath the bottom drawer, a small, dusty envelope. Curiosity tugged at her fingers, and she hesitated. But then she pulled it free. Inside was a faded photograph. Two children, arms around each other, grinning from ear to ear. One of them was unmistakably a young Joshua. The other, her breath hitched. It was a younger version of herself, or someone who looked strikingly like her, same eyes, same smile. She dropped the envelope. Happiness stared at the photo, then at the name scribbled on the back. Joshua and Joy Mango Tree Summer. She sank into the leather chair behind the desk, her heart pounding. Her name wasn't Joy. Or was it? She didn't remember much before she was 8. Her mother always said they moved around a lot because of hardship. Why do I look like her? She whispered. Her fingers trembled as she held the photo up to the light. The girl wore a necklace, her necklace. The same one she'd worn all her life. She pressed her hand to her chest. What is this? The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her back to reality. She stuffed the envelope into her apron just as the door creaked open. You're still in here? Agnes asked suspiciously, narrowing her eyes. Just finished, Happiness said, forcing a smile. But inside, her world had begun to crack, and something long buried was now rising from beneath the surface. That night, long after the mansion had gone quiet, Happiness sat cross-legged on the edge of her small bed, staring at the photograph again. She'd pulled it out from beneath her mattress, where she had hidden it after returning from the library. There was no denying it, the girl was her. Not just similar, not just a distant likeness. It was her face, her grin, her necklace. Joy, she whispered aloud, tasting the name like a forgotten melody. Didn't sound foreign. It didn't feel wrong. In fact, it stirred something in her chest she couldn't name. She thought of all the times she'd asked her mother why she had no childhood pictures. The woman would always change the topic, offering vague excuses about floods, losses, or fire. But now she held proof that a piece of her past had been hidden from her. She rose and walked to the tiny vanity in the corner of her room. Her reflection stared back, calm but shaken. Who are you really? She asked herself. And why does he have a photo of you? Her fingers traced her face in the mirror as if trying to peel back time. Then she opened her wardrobe and removed a worn shoebox tucked behind her slippers. Inside were the only keepsakes she had, a torn storybook, a broken comb, and a ribbon she'd always assumed was hers. She stared at them for a long while before whispering, Josh. The name felt too natural, too right. And the memory it stirred, a boy chasing butterflies, laughter echoing in the distance, brought tears to her eyes. She held the photograph to her chest and cried silently, not from pain or fear, but from a strange blend of grief and recognition. She didn't know what she had lost, but she now knew it had once meant everything. A heavy downpour swept through the city that evening, lightning cracking through the sky as thunder followed in deep, unsettling waves. The mansion lost power for the first time in years. Panic didn't ripple through the house, just confusion. In the darkness, Joshua moved through the hallways with a flashlight, searching for the circuit room. As he reached the back of the house, he turned the corner and nearly collided with Happiness, who was clutching a candle and a flashlight of her own. "Sorry, sir," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered. "I was checking the laundry wing." Joshua nodded and moved past her, but after a few steps, he stopped. "Wait, can we talk?" he asked, his voice unusually hesitant. She paused, then gave a gentle nod. "Yes, of course." They ended up in the kitchen, the only room that smelled of warmth and flickering with candlelight from the emergency drawer. Rain pelted the windows as they sat across from each other, a small table between them. "I saw the photograph," Joshua began. "It fell from the ledgers last week. I didn't know it was still here." Happiness looked down at her hands. "I found it yesterday," she admitted. "I didn't mean to, but I recognized myself." Her voice faltered. "I don't remember much from before we moved, but something's been waking up in me lately." Joshua leaned forward. "Your name. It wasn't always Happiness, was it?" She blinked. "No, I think it was Joy. My mother never explained. She said forgetting made life easier." Her lips trembled. "But when I saw that photo and the tree, I remembered the boy who gave me mangoes. And a necklace." She looked up at him now, eyes glistening. "Was that you, Joshi?" It was the first time she'd said it out loud. Joshua's throat tightened. "Yes," he whispered, voice breaking. "It was me." Victoria stood stiffly by her window the next morning, arms folded, her fingers digging into her sleeves as she watched Happiness carry a watering can through the garden. She had always been composed, regal, never one to panic. But this morning, her tea had gone untouched. When Harold entered the room, she didn't turn to face him. "She found something," she said plainly. Harold sighed, already aware. "You said her family was gone for good," she added, her voice low. "You told me it was done." Harold stepped beside her. "I paid them well to disappear. They didn't have much choice. She was a child. What were the odds she'd resurface in our son's house?" Victoria turned, her eyes sharp. "She's not just resurfacing, Harold. She's remembering." Her breath caught. "Do you understand what happens if she remembers everything?" Harold remained silent, then placed his hand on her shoulder. "Then we handle it," he said firmly. "Like we've always handled things." Victoria stepped back. "No, not this time. Joshua's already too invested. He hasn't been himself for weeks. He's changed." She walked toward the grand mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection as if trying to find the woman she used to be. "If he finds out what we did, what we orchestrated." She trailed off. Harold's voice came from behind her. "We did what we had to. Joy was not his future. She was a village girl with nothing. We gave him a clean slate." Victoria's eyes filled with something between regret and dread. "We gave him an illusion," she whispered. "And now reality is knocking. We need to act, Harold. Quietly. She can't stay here any longer." But even as she said the words, a knot twisted in her gut, a rare sign that perhaps, for the first time, she was afraid of being wrong. 17 years ago, in a dimly lit mud brick house in New KJ, a young couple sat across from Harold Smith. They were tense, the wife holding her daughter's small hand tightly while the husband tried to hold his own anger in check. "You want us to vanish?" the man had asked. Harold nodded. "You'll receive enough to start over, far from here. But the girl must never return. She must never contact Joshua again." The mother's eyes welled up. "They're just children. They don't even understand what friendship means yet." Harold's voice was like steel. "That's exactly why I'm here, to make sure they never get the chance." He dropped a thick brown envelope on the table. "You'll tell the village she died of illness. I'll take care of the burial arrangements." The father hesitated. "We'll need time to explain it to her." Harold's jaw clenched. "You don't have time. Tonight you leave. If you want protection, take the money." Years later, the mother sat alone in their tiny one-bedroom flat in a distant town, watching her daughter, now Happiness, serve food at a local diner. She had never told her the truth. The guilt aged her faster than time itself. That necklace, Joy's necklace, was the only thing she had left from those stolen days. When she'd finally given it back to her daughter, she said it came from someone who once cared for you. But the weight of the lie never left her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered often when Happiness wasn't listening. "I didn't want to lose you. I had no choice." In the present, Happiness stirred uneasily in her sleep, her body restless under tangled sheets. Memories flickered behind her eyelids, muddy roads, mango trees, a boy with dimples. For the first time, she awoke gasping, the name Joy, escaping her lips like a ghost, finally allowed to speak. She sat upright, clutching her chest. "I remember something," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I remember him." Agnes moved with purpose that morning, eyes sharp as blades. Something about Happiness's growing confidence unsettled her. How Joshua's tone changed whenever the girl entered a room, how the others began softening toward her, despite the rumors. Agnes couldn't allow it. She waited until midday, then crept into Happiness's room while everyone was preparing for a late lunch gathering. It was too easy. She slid open the wooden drawer by the bed and placed a small velvet pouch beneath the folded clothes. Inside, a pair of earrings from Victoria's private collection, taken from the sitting room cabinet earlier. As she backed out, she straightened the room precisely as she'd found it, leaving no trace. Later, as Happiness prepared tea in the kitchen, Agnes appeared, face painted in distress. "Madam's earrings are gone," she said loudly. "The gold ones. They were there this morning." Heads turned, whispers followed, and within minutes, a house search was announced. Victoria's voice cut through the quiet as she stood in the foyer, arms folded. "Search all their quarters, everyone." Her eyes landed on Happiness, unblinking, including hers. Joshua stepped into the room, hearing the commotion. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. "Mother, this is unnecessary." Victoria didn't blink. "Something is missing. We'll treat everyone fairly." The staff watched as the butler and 2 guards checked rooms, one after the other, until they reached Happiness's. The moment the velvet pouch appeared from her drawer, the air shifted. "There," Agnes said, pretending to gasp. Happiness froze. "That's not mine." Her voice shook with confusion. "I've never seen those." But no one spoke up for her, not yet. Joshua's gaze flicked from the earrings to her face. "You're sure?" he asked softly. "Yes," her eyes filled with tears. "I would never take anything." "I don't know how," Victoria cut in. "This is not a court, Joshua. We can't keep someone under suspicion in this house." Silence followed. Joshua looked down at the earrings, something gnawing at him. Something didn't fit, but proving it would require more than instinct. He didn't say a word, and that silence pierced deeper than any accusation. They brought Happiness into the main sitting room where the other staff members stood quietly along the walls, faces a mix of judgment and pity. Victoria sat poised on the armrest of her chaise, Harold close by, his arms crossed. Agnes stood near the door, her eyes gleaming with false concern. Happiness stood in the center, her hands trembling at her sides. Joshua leaned against the fireplace, silent, watching. "This house," Victoria began, "has functioned for years with trust and loyalty. Theft undermines both." Happiness's lips parted to defend herself, but Victoria raised a hand. "We will not debate character. We will act on facts. The earrings were found in your room." At that moment, a flash of silver caught Harold's eye. Happiness's necklace had slipped forward again. His face visibly changed, his spine stiffened. "Where did you get that necklace?" Harold asked, voice low but firm. Everyone turned to look. Happiness instinctively covered it with her palm. "It's mine," she whispered. "It was given to me when I was young." Joshua stepped forward slightly, eyes narrowed. "Do you recognize it, Father?" Harold didn't respond immediately. Then, coldly, "Things from the past should stay buried." The room went still. Victoria's brow furrowed. "Harold!" she pressed, but he didn't meet her eyes. Joshua walked to Happiness and gently took the necklace in his hand. "There's a mark on the back," he said. "Turn it over." He showed them the engraving, faint but clear. J and J Forever Summer. Harold's expression cracked. Agnes took a step back. Victoria's face turned pale. "That necklace," Joshua said, his voice quiet but firm, "was buried with a girl I loved. Or so I was told." Happiness's lip quivered. "I think I was that girl," she whispered. The house was silent. A story long hidden had just resurfaced, not with drama, but with undeniable weight. The guests had all gone. The staff had retreated. But Joshua remained in his study that night, pacing the same square of polished floor for hours. When he heard soft footsteps, he looked up. Happiness stood at the door, her eyes red but steady. "May I speak?" she asked. He nodded. She stepped inside slowly, holding the photo she had found earlier. She laid it on the desk between them. "This is us, isn't it?" she asked. Joshua picked it up, the edges worn, the ink fading. "Yes," he said. "You were Joy. You were my best friend. I searched for you after they said you were gone. But there was no goodbye, no truth. Just silence." His voice cracked. "Who told you your name was Happiness?" She sat slowly across from him. "My mother. After we moved, she said we needed new names. I never understood why until now." Joshua leaned back, exhaling sharply. "Agnes set you up," he said. "I saw it in her face today. She looked too satisfied." Happiness nodded. "She hates me. I never knew why." Joshua's tone hardened. "Because you remind everyone of something they couldn't control." A silence passed between them, heavy but unthreatening. Then he leaned forward. "Do you want to remember everything?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me is scared of what I'll find." He reached across the desk, not to touch her, but to rest his palm near hers. "Then let's find out together. No rush. No pressure, but no more lies." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you." Joshi. He smiled faintly, a name he hadn't heard in years, melting the ice around his heart. Somewhere between them, the ache of the past was no longer sharp. It was softening, quietly giving way to something else, recognition. Joshua returned to his father's study the next morning, compelled by a restlessness he couldn't shake. The desk drawers were all locked, but he knew Harold's habits too well. The third drawer down had a hidden latch near the side rail. He clicked it open and retrieved a leather file folder stuffed with aging documents. Most were business records, but one unmarked envelope, yellowed by time, caught his eye. He opened it gently. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated 17 years prior. As his eyes scanned the contents, he froze. It was addressed to Joy's parents. His father had written it. "The arrangement is in place. Payment completed. This child must never re-enter our lives. Do not contact us. Let this be the end." Joshua's chest tightened, so it had been deliberate. Planned. Paid for. Everything he suspected was true and worse. He sat motionless for a long while, the letter shaking slightly in his hand. Every word confirmed the betrayal. "He took her from me," Joshua whispered to himself. They both did. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket. That evening, he confronted Harold in the sunroom where he was sipping brandy alone. "You buried the truth just to clean up your version of my life," Joshua said, tossing the letter onto the glass table. Harold's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. "You didn't just silence a child's memory. You tore apart something real," Joshua continued, voice rising. Harold finally spoke. "You were a boy. You would have thrown your future away on a girl with nothing." Joshua shook his head. "She was everything. And you knew it." Victoria entered then, hearing the commotion. Her gaze fell on the letter. For the first time in years, she looked unsure. "Joshua," she began, but he turned away. "I don't want apologies. I want space, and I want the truth from now on. Nothing less." The next morning, Happiness stood in her small room with her suitcase open on the bed. The air was heavy with a decision already made. She folded her clothes slowly, placing the photograph between two shirts. There was no rage, no bitterness, just a quiet ache in her chest. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the scene in the drawing room. The rumors hadn't stopped, and her presence now felt like an open wound in the mansion. As she packed, she stared at her reflection in the mirror one last time. "Joy," she whispered to herself. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding." She slipped the necklace back around her neck and zipped up the bag. Just as she opened the door to leave, Joshua stood there. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice gentler than she expected. She avoided his gaze. "I don't belong here anymore. I think I was never supposed to be here in the first place." Joshua stepped into the room, blocking the door behind him. "If you believe that, then let it be your choice, not theirs." She looked at him now, her eyes uncertain. "It's not just about the rumors or the lies. I need to understand who I really am. Outside of this house, Joshua nodded slowly. Then don't leave like this. Stay long enough to find your answers. Not for me, for yourself, Happiness hesitated. What if staying causes more harm? His answer was quiet. Then we'll deal with it together. No more shadows, just truth. Her eyes shimmered. She set the bag down but didn't unpack. Not yet, not fully. Just enough to show she wasn't walking away, not today. Victoria waited until Joshua left for a business meeting before summoning Happiness to the rose garden. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting shadows across Victoria's sharp features, as she stood with perfect posture beside a trimmed hedge. Happiness approached slowly, unsure of what to expect. "You called for me, ma'am?" she asked, keeping her hands clasped tightly. Victoria didn't answer immediately. She turned, looked at the younger woman, and said with a calmness that sent chills down her spine, "You were never meant to be here." Happiness blinked, confused. "Excuse me." Victoria stepped closer. "You were part of a forgotten chapter, a closed book. Your reappearance has brought unrest to this house, to my son, to everything we've protected." Her voice was not angry, but laced with deep control. "I never came here with a plan," Happiness replied quietly. "Didn't even know who I was until recently." Victoria's lips twitched. "That doesn't matter. What matters is what you represent, a life we worked very hard to erase." There was a pause. Then she softened, just slightly. "You remind Joshua of someone he lost. But men confuse grief for attachment, and soon enough it passes." Happiness held her ground. "Or maybe they remember the truth," she said. Victoria's composure faltered for half a breath. "Truth is rarely convenient," she replied. "And if you care for him even slightly, you'll walk away." Happiness stepped back. "I did pack. But he asked me to stay, not as a maid, not as a lost child, just to breathe and remember." Victoria's gaze hardened. "If you think staying will bring you peace, you're wrong. This house was not built to comfort outsiders. It was built to keep them out." With that, she walked away, heels clicking against the stone path. But Happiness didn't move. Her feet stayed rooted, as did her resolve. No one would push her out again, not until she knew exactly who she was. When Joshua returned that evening, he didn't go to his study or his room. He walked directly to the servant quarters. The hallway was dim, the air still. He stopped in front of Happiness's door and knocked softly. She opened it, eyes weary but calm. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Not exactly," he said, then motioned toward the hallway. "Walk with me," she nodded, grabbing a shawl as they stepped into the courtyard. The moon hung low, casting silver over the flower beds. "You don't owe me anything, Joy," Joshua began, the name slipping from his lips with surprising ease. "I know you're trying to find your footing, and I want to help, not as your employer, just as someone who owes you the truth." She looked at him carefully. "And what truth is that?" He stopped near a bench and turned to her. "This house can't offer you peace right now, but it can offer you space. I've made arrangements. There's a guest room on the east wing. It's yours, no uniforms, no duties. Just time to remember who you are." She blinked, caught between relief and suspicion. "Why would you do that for me?" Joshua took a deep breath. "Because for years I believed I lost someone. And now I see her in you. But this, whatever this is, it has to begin without pressure. No roles, no obligations," her voice cracked. "You're not afraid of what your parents will say." He chuckled, but it lacked humor. "They already said everything. I'm done letting them speak for me." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay. But not as a guest or a project. Just as someone trying to remember." He smiled gently. "That's all I ask." The days that followed were quieter, gentler in rhythm. Happiness moved into the east wing and spent her mornings alone on the balcony overlooking the garden, writing in a worn notebook Joshua had gifted her. "For your memories," he had said, "even the broken ones." On the third morning, she brewed tea and asked the housekeeper to bring an extra cup to the study. When Joshua entered, surprised by the gesture, she smiled softly. "I thought it was time I did the inviting." He took the seat opposite her, the air warm with the scent of ginger and lemongrass. "How are the pages coming?" he asked. She hesitated. "Some are blank. Others hurt to write." He nodded. "That's how healing starts." They sipped in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "There's something strange about remembering in pieces. You don't get the full emotion, just shadows of it. He leaned back, watching her carefully. What do the shadows say? She smiled faintly. They say I was happy once, that I was safe. Joshua exhaled. Then maybe your memories aren't just fragments. Maybe they're maps. She looked at him then, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. Do you think we were meant to meet again? He shook his head. I think we were interrupted. And now we're back to the page where someone tore the story. A long silence followed, filled only by the quiet clinking of spoons. It wasn't romance. It wasn't friendship. It was something softer, a bridge being rebuilt, plank by plank, from a foundation neither had asked to lose. It happened in the garden, beneath the oldest mango tree in the estate. Happiness was tending to the base of the trunk, pulling weeds absent-mindedly when her fingers brushed against the smooth curve of a familiar rock. She paused, breath catching. Her eyes widened as she slowly turned the stone over. A faded etching on its surface, JJ stared back at her. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was the stone Joshua had carved when they were children, promising friendship forever. She sat back on her heels, overcome by a rush of warmth and confusion. A memory hit her like a flood. Dirt-streaked cheeks, mango juice dripping down her arms, Joshua laughing, handing her a stone and saying, "So you never forget me, even when we're old." Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the stone to her chest. "You really were my best friend," she whispered. That night, she knocked on Joshua's door, holding the stone tightly. He opened it, eyebrows raised. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she walked past him, placed the stone on his desk, and stepped back. He picked it up slowly. "Where did you find this?" he asked, voice trembling. "Under the mango tree," she said softly. "I remember you now. I remember you giving it to me." A tear slid down her cheek. "You were the only boy who never teased me. The only one who waited when I couldn't run fast." He looked at her, stunned. "And you were the only girl who called me Joshi in front of my father and got away with it." They both laughed through tears. In that moment, no explanations were needed. The memory had returned, not just to her, but to them both. Victoria stood at the bay window of her private suite, watching Joshua and Happiness from afar as they walked across the lawn, their laughter carried faintly by the breeze. Her jaw tightened. Behind her, Harold entered, already sensing her unrest. "They're closer now," she said without turning. "Too close." Harold poured himself a drink, his silence a confirmation. "I spoke to the board," she added. "Joshua's decision to transfer shares temporarily is raising questions. If she continues to influence him." Her words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Harold sipped slowly, then muttered, "We may need to intervene again." She turned sharply. "No more letters, no more hush payments. This time, we remove the distraction. Permanently." Later that evening, Harold called Joshua to the sitting room. The tone was formal. "We need to talk about your recent decisions," Harold began. "Your emotional entanglements are starting to affect your judgment." Joshua narrowed his eyes. "You mean Joy?" Victoria stepped in then, calm but cutting. "You've given her power, not in name, but in presence. And that presence is bleeding into business." Joshua folded his arms. "I made a choice. One I should have been allowed to make years ago. You took that from me then. I won't let you do it now." Harold's voice hardened. "And if your board revolts? If your reputation collapses under the weight of a scandal?" Joshua stood. "Then let it. I won't trade people for position anymore." He turned and walked out, not waiting to hear their reply. Upstairs, Happiness heard the faint echo of his footsteps and knew something had shifted again. And this time it wasn't fear that followed. It was resolve. By morning, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed. Joshua had made a quiet visit to his legal advisor at dawn and returned with signed documents. He didn't announce them. He handed them straight to his father over breakfast. "What's this?" Harold asked, flipping through the pages. Joshua's voice was calm but unwavering. "Power of attorney. I'm transferring majority control of the company, temporarily, to the board. I'll take a sabbatical. You can assure the public I've stepped back for personal wellness." Victoria nearly dropped her fork. "You're handing over your legacy?" Joshua met her gaze. "I'm reclaiming my life. Legacy means nothing if it's built on a lie." Harold scoffed. "And what do you intend to do while the board runs everything?" Joshua's reply was simple. "Heal." learn who I am outside this empire, and maybe finally grieve the childhood I was forced to forget. He stood. If holding on to money means letting go of truth, then take it all. The room was stunned into silence. Later that day, Happiness found a note slipped under her door. It was in Joshua's handwriting. You don't have to run anymore. Neither do I. Let's breathe. She pressed the paper to her chest and smiled softly, tears warming her cheeks. That night, the east wing windows glowed not with extravagance, but with peace, a kind neither of them had ever known inside these walls. Not until now. At twilight, Joshua stood under the mango tree where their childhood had once bloomed and vanished. He waited, hands in his pockets, the old stone still in his palm. When Happiness arrived, she was barefoot, the grass brushing her ankles, her scarf trailing gently behind her. She said nothing at first, just sat beside him on the low wooden bench, their silence filled with everything unspoken. This place, he finally murmured, saw both of us before we even knew what loss meant. She looked up at the branches swaying overhead. And now it's watching us return, he smiled. Do you still remember the game we used to play? You'd hide mangoes in your dress and pretend they were treasure. She laughed quietly. And you'd always find them, even when I swore you couldn't. The laughter faded into a peaceful stillness. Joshua turned slightly toward her. I brought you here because I needed to say something where truth can't be filtered by walls. She glanced at him, her expression open. Say it, he exhaled. I don't want to rush into anything. Not love, not expectations, not answers. I just want us to be honest, without labels, without pressure. Happiness nodded slowly. That's what I want too, to remember without being pushed, to exist without proving myself. They sat for a while longer, watching the sky deepen into soft purples and blue. Fireflies flickered near the roots. Joshua placed the stone between them. We started something here once, he whispered. Maybe we're not meant to finish it. Maybe we're just meant to begin it again. Slower. She reached over and gently touched the stone, her fingers brushing his for a brief, tender moment. Then let this be our first truth, she said. And for once, the night held no shadows between them. The mansion had grown quieter, not from absence but from clarity. Joshua and Happiness now occupied the same space without the burden of roles or expectations. He no longer treated her like someone who needed saving, and she no longer felt like someone who had to prove she belonged. They walked side by side in the garden some afternoons, their conversations meandering from childhood memories to favorite foods to what it meant to be forgotten by those who claimed to love you. Do you think healing ever ends? She asked one day, sitting on the edge of the fountain. Joshua sat beside her. No, I think it just changes shape. Sometimes it looks like solitude. Other times it looks like forgiveness. She looked at him, eyes steady. I'm not ready for anything romantic. Not yet, he smiled. I know, I'm not asking for anything. Just this, whatever this is. Later that evening, they shared dinner not in the formal dining room, but in the small kitchen Happiness had once scrubbed. The walls echoed with laughter, soft, infrequent, but real. Agnes had resigned quietly 2 days earlier, her silence louder than any apology. Victoria, still struggling to mask her disapproval, no longer challenged Joshua's decisions. Harold, though less vocal, had begun spending more time away from the estate, perhaps to avoid facing the consequences of a truth too long buried. In the midst of it all, Joshua and Happiness made no declarations. No hand-holding, no whispered promises, just presence. And presence after years of silence and stolen pasts felt sacred. Before she went to bed, Happiness placed the carved stone on her new bedside table and whispered, Tomorrow, I write the part of my story I choose. Outside her window, the mango tree swayed gently, as if it had been waiting all this time for their return. Weeks later, the first rains of the season arrived, light, cleansing, and unexpected. Happiness stood on the balcony wrapped in a shawl, watching the droplets kiss the garden below. The house no longer felt like a cage or a castle. It was just a place, walls holding fragments of old pain and new peace. Joshua was in the study, flipping through the journal she had left open on the desk earlier. On one of the pages, written in neat, slanted handwriting, were the words, Healing isn't loud. Sometimes it just means staying when it would be easier to run. He closed the book gently and looked out the window, where he saw her, arms outstretched, smiling up at the sky. He didn't interrupt. She looked free. And that was enough. That evening, Happiness returned to her room and picked up her pen again. She began to write, "My name is Joy. But I am also Happiness. I am not who they said I was. And I'm not who they tried to make me forget. I am becoming, slowly, on my own terms." She paused, pressing the pen gently against the paper, then added, "And though there's no romance yet, there is peace. There is truth. There is Joshua, no longer the boy from the tree, but the man who gave me back my name without asking for my heart." She closed the journal, slipped the necklace around her neck, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the night hummed with quiet possibility. No ending had been written, and none was needed. What remained between them was not a final chapter, but a first one, still waiting to unfold, without pressure or deadlines. Only hope. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.